Happy to welcome everyone out to another video interview for the Strong Youth Project, a relatively new project at BYU where our mission is to improve the youth sport experience for all of the stakeholders, including parents, coaches, administrators, but especially the kids. And so today we're happy to welcome Dr. Michael Larson from the Department of Psychology at BYU. And I've asked Parker Dean, one of our undergraduate students in exercise sciences, to go ahead and introduce Dr. Larson.
Awesome. Yeah, so Dr. Michael Larson is a professor of psychology in the Department of Psychology and Neuroscience Center at Brigham Young University, where he has taught and conducted research since 2008. Dr. Larson holds a Bachelors of Science Degree in Psychology from BYU and a Master's and PhD in Clinical Psychology from the University of Florida, Gainesville. Dr. Larson has served as the editor and one of the psychologists of the International Journal of Psychophysiology since 2016. He also works as a sports psychologist for the men's basketball team at BYU. His list of awards and recognitions is far too long to cover comprehensively this morning, but includes the top-cited Scholar Award in the field of biology for the Public Library of Science in 2017, and the Martin B. Hickman Award for Innovation in Teaching at BYU in 2018. Dr. Larson is a recognized scholar on reducing sport-related anxiety in athletes and improving mental health for athletes. We're grateful to have you here with us this morning, Dr. Larson, and like Dr. Seeley had mentioned earlier, he has asked me to start off with the questions, so I'll just jump right in there. The first one that we really want to look at is how common is pre-event anxiety among youth athletes, and what are the signs and symptoms that come along with that?
Yeah. So pre-event anxiety, we often call it performance anxiety, that can happen amongst youth, adults, anyone, depending on what they're doing. You get little butterflies in the stomach, your heart rate goes up. I mean, it's a super normal reaction. Where it becomes impairing is when you can't do what you want to do, right? So if you're going into a basketball game, you're super tight, you get in there and you end up just laying an egg because you're so anxious.
Yeah.
That's where it becomes impairing. Right, so it's normal, and we want to emphasize it's a normal thing to be nervous before a game or before a match or even before a practice. That's okay. It's just how you manage it. So how common is it? Anywhere from 10% to 50% of athletes will have some form of impairing performance anxiety. But all of us have nerves, right? And it's managing those nerves, managing that stress that we work on a lot with athletes.
That's cool. By impairing, do you mean that it affects their ability during a game and during their performance?
Yeah, it affects all of us,
just
right?
Everything.
So, for example, I went in the other day to an interview where I was interviewing a really hard case. Not an athlete, but just a really hard case. I was a little nervous about it, and my first questions were a little off, right? Because I was nervous going in. Then as we settled in, we got going and we got the information we needed. So that wouldn't be impairing. It affected my performance, sure, but it didn't lead to my performance becoming where I couldn't do my job. And that's where you get the impairing level of performance anxiety, where it's clinical levels, where you can no longer do the thing that you want to do because you're so ramped up.
Reminds me of playing on my 9th grade basketball team. I vividly remember my first game ever. I checked in, and it was like I had never learned to run. I couldn't even run down the floor. I remember shooting a pair of free throws, barely drawing iron. Mm-hmm. And I remember Coach Felstead pulling me immediately after that. And he said, "Matt, you look like you're going to pass out there." Yeah. So that's what we're talking about, right?
Yeah, where it gets to the level that you just can't do what you want to do. And as a coach or as a parent, you have a few options in that moment, right? You see the 9th grader running down and just losing it. You can either give them a shot to work through it, which is, at a 9th grade level, that's probably what we'd encourage. We'd say, okay, let them work through it. They'll settle. They'll settle. Or you pull them, but if you pull them, you get into this outcome focus where you miss 2 free throws, and now next time I get on the free throw line and I miss, is the coach going to pull me? So that's going to ramp up that performance anxiety, right? And so there's a certain value, especially in youth, to letting them work through it for a while, letting them, we call it habituation. Your body can't maintain that level of stress for a super long time. It'll start to habituate on its own as you get used to the circumstances, get used to what's there. That heart rate will normalize, things will come down. Now, if the kid's having a full-on panic attack, let's get them out of there, right? Let's reduce that. But if they're just a little amped up, they're just a little tight, let them play through it. Give them a minute. they'll be okay.
So I should have introduced at the beginning of our meeting today. This is Justin Yee. He's a youth soccer coach. He's a co-founder of the Strong Youth Project. Justin, can I jump in? I'm going to actually speak. As a coach, how long do you wait for the habituation? Like, how long does it typically last?
Depends on the kid, right? So I coach my son's youth basketball team. I coach my son's flag football team. And there's a kid that we just love that's on both of his teams, but he's really highly anxious. And for him, it takes several series in flag football to fully adjust. And I'm just like, cool. Like, that's all right. Like, my goal as a youth coach isn't to win every championship. My goal is to develop these kids. And so you want that focus on the process of how do we get better and how do we regulate. And he's gotten better and better over the years. Our last flag football game, this kid who's so anxious, we dumped a screen pass off to him and he took it to the house. He took it for a touchdown within the first series of the game. And it just showed huge improvement over the last few years because he's now learned to habituate. So the how long, it depends on the kid and depends on the situation they're in.
So what can you do off the field on days other than game day to try and minimize the habituation period? Yeah.
So there's lots of different things. The biggest thing is getting them in environments that most simulate what they're going to look like in a game, right? So if practices, we want practices to be fun and enjoyable while they're developing the skills. But it's good to have a piece of practice where there is some competition, not necessarily focused on the outcome, the winner, the loser gets punished. We try and avoid that. What we're trying to do is get them in a process-focused situation where it's like, hey, let's simulate the environment at the beginning of a game. And let's talk about how we visualize that. Okay, so that visualization, you can get your body in a place where it seems super similar to a game, right? And then you can practice that habituation. You can teach breathing techniques. I mean, super easy ones called the physiological sigh. Physiological sigh will it'll increase your parasympathetic response, decrease your sympathetic response super quick. You guys know the physiological sigh?
I didn't know it was named that, but my dad has also kind of coached me in that a little bit, like just to reset. It's like a reset button. You're setting your body again.
Yeah, it's simple. It's 2 breaths in without breathing out. So, and then a long exhale. And there's been great research on that showing how it'll normalize heart rate pretty quick.
This sounds like something you could do multiple times a day if this is something you struggle with.
Yeah, anytime you're ramping up. I was working with one of the BYU basketball players yesterday. He was a little bit in his head about a few things that have been happening in practice, and he's like, what do I do just when I get out on the court and I'm feeling it in my head? Like, well, the first thing we want to do is just bring your physiology down, and then we'll work on your thoughts second. He's like, oh, so we're going to do the physiological side thing, right? And I'm like, yeah. So just go in, 2 breaths in, hold for a second, then. And you'll see a lot, like if you watch BYU basketball, you'll see several of them doing it during the course of the game.
I'll definitely be looking for that.
I think we see a lot of athletes do that, right? Whether it's free throws where it's a controlled response, right?
Yeah.
You don't have somebody in your face. Soccer tends to do it on free kicks. You'll see them take that deep breath in, and then that long exhale. And, being a prior law enforcement, that's kind of what we always would do before we get on the radio in a stressful situation is take a deep breath just to calm down, and do that type of stuff. So that's great. So I'm hearing a lot of great stuff, right? And so from a coaching perspective, we'll go to that as well, is I'm hearing some kids are naturally anxious, right? So there's a certain personality trait. What are some of those personality traits that parents can look at in their own kid so they can recognize, hey, I have 5 children and they're vastly different, each one of them, right? And so what advice do you give to parents of what to look for just to see if their kid is maybe naturally more anxious?
Yeah, sure. So when we talk about anxiety disorders, like when we get to clinically impairing levels, they're disorders of avoidance. So people start avoiding the very thing that they're anxious about, which is negatively reinforcing. So let me give you an example. You get a kid in a game who really is super anxious, and he's like, Coach, I can't do it. I can't go in. Say, all right, like you can sit this one out. That's okay. What happens to the kid's anxiety in that moment? It's relieved, right? Because he doesn't have to go in, or she doesn't have to go in and face the thing that they were scared about. So they avoid. That anxiety reduces, and that's reinforcing because you've removed the thing that was making them anxious in that moment. So the next time they get in that situation, what are they going to do? They're going to say, I can't go in. Get me out. get me out, and it's going to be negatively reinforcing. Over time, they're going to be like, I'm done with this sport because I feel so much better when I'm out than when I'm in, right? And there are some situations where a kid's losing his mind or her mind. You don't want to put them in that situation where they have a bad experience. But generally speaking, the way you treat disorders of avoidance, anxiety disorders, is you expose them to the thing that they are avoiding. And hopefully you can do it gradually, starting in practices, then working your way up to games. But the big thing you want to not do is just be like, no, you're fine. But yeah, let's get you out of that stressful situation, because that just perpetuates the cycle.
How do you do this with your youth athlete and not make them feel like you're minimizing their feeling, right? So this is actually a joke at my house. My wife, who was, she's a great athlete in her own respect. She tells all of us in the house, "You got this." It's you got this, as if, and a lot of us in the house feel like she's just minimizing our anxiety. Like we want to yell, "No, I don't got this."
Yeah.
So you got any you hear what I'm saying? Like, how do you?
Yeah, so one of the first things we teach people is to look for evidence. Okay, so you get in a situation like, I'm super nervous. What evidence do you have that you're able to do this? Right, well, last time I went out for my run, I was really anxious before, and then I got out there, and I was able to overcome it, and it felt really good. I think that's the implicit message of you got this, is I've seen you do this before. Let's do it. So get on their level. Like if you have a really small youth, you want to get on their level with them so you can look them in the eyes and you just want to be like, man, I totally understand this is tough, right? This is tough. Soccer's hard. Let's go out there and all I want you to do is focus on one thing, right? I just want you to run, or I just want you to kick, right? One of the BYU athletes, our big thing with him is hunt. Like if he's feeling super anxious, we want him to hunt his shot. So he goes out hunting when we do it. And just a one simple step thing. So not focus on the whole game and all the parents and all the people and all the crap. We don't want that. We want, okay, go out and hunt your shot. Go out and run. Go out and just kick, or else just play your spot. But let them focus on one thing instead of everything at once. And if they're a little bit older, you can get into the evidence-seeking stuff. So what evidence? Have we done this before? Yeah, we have, and it worked. So always lead with a little bit of empathy, a little bit of compassion, you know. The whole, you know, previously where we'd throw kids in the water and be like, swim, swim, you know, without telling them how to swim. So that's what practice is for, like getting them in those situations, visualizing those situations, doing them. And then in the game, you know, like I said, if they're losing their mind, don't throw them in and be like, you're losing your mind, swim, swim. But if they're in a place where they can be there, get them in there and say, let's focus just on this one thing.
So I have a question for anxiety. We know a lot of statistics say a lot of youth will quit sports by the time they're 12 or 13, right? Like 70%. Yep. Do you know, I don't know, how much of that 70% is because of anxiety? Maybe it's not crippling, but you know, they get an elevated heart rate, they feel that stuff at home, just thinking about practice a couple hours later, and they just don't want any part of it. Or maybe it's just a game, because practice is fun, but then the game situation is different. You know, is there anything out there that says that anxiety is maybe a leading factor to why kids quit? And if so, is it, a lot of questions here for you. Is it environmental or is it more personally? Because I guess I spend a lot of time right now, I'll kind of go on this, right, where I'm trying to help the parents on the sidelines, especially during games, to reduce the amount of anxiety that they might be creating their athlete. You know, so one of the things that I say to our youngest parents, and these are 7 to 8 year olds, right, is how often do your kids hear you with an elevated voice, like yelling, right? And even though you may be really excited because they're on a breakaway or they're about to score or you want them to shoot it, how often do they hear you yelling? It usually gets a little bit of a pause, right? And I'm like, and of the times they do hear you yelling, how many times is it positive, right? And so it gets a lot of people thinking, but I don't really, this is just a coach that's been out, 20 years thinking like, hey, I don't know if yelling at a kid when he's running down the field is helpful, because I usually see him mess up more than not, right? Because in practice they're fine, nobody's yelling at them. They'll score 9 out of 10. In a game it's 1 out of 10. So I have a feeling it has to do with the yelling. But thoughts on that?
Yeah, so let's break it down. So first off, do we know the exact contribution rate of anxiety to kids discontinuing sports? I haven't seen a study on that, so I don't know numbers. What we do know is that rates of anxiety in the general population and in kids specifically are increasing. So anxiety disorders are now the number one, like the highest percentage of people in the population have anxiety disorders relative to anything else. Greater than major depression, greater than anything. So anxiety is now the top mental disorder. Anywhere from 19% of people up to 33% of people will be diagnosed with an anxiety disorder in a given year. So this is clinical levels of anxiety where people can't do what they want to do anymore. So is it contributing? I'm certain it is. What's the percentage? I don't know. But we do know that anxiety disorders are way on the rise, along with all mental health conditions. Why is that? We're not completely sure. Part of it's COVID. Part of it's the world has changed. Part of it's phones and always being connected. There's a lot of factors that are going into it, but all these things are cranking up across the board. So it certainly plays a role. Second, what we want to focus on as parents and coaches is how they're doing, like their performance, but not their outcomes. Mm-hmm. So let's separate those things. So we have process-focused goals. We have process-focused things where we're focusing on a skill with youth. Then we have outcome-focused goals and outcome-focused, cheering and things where we're focused on an outcome. So a process focus would be like getting in your spots on the basketball court, making the right pass on the soccer pitch, right? Whereas an outcome focus is like scoring the goal, getting the assist. If you go in saying, hey, we need to win 8 games this season, that's very outcome focused. It's very binary. You either do it or
you don't.
You don't. And if you don't, you weren't good enough, right? We didn't accomplish our goals. When coaches are always outcome focused, or when they have that tendency to be outcome focused, that drives up anxiety, because either we're good enough or we're not. BYU played in Gonzaga last year and lost by 1 point. Freaking Strother nailed that really hard shot. And the feeling in the locker room after was just devastating, right? Because Gonzaga was number 1 at the time. Because of one shot. And there was a whole game that went in there. But had he missed that shot, the feeling in the locker room would have been
total opposite.
Yeah, just elation and everything. And I walked into the locker room and was kind of like, hey, how do I work with the guys here? Like, what I want to be focused on is the process of improvement, the process of saying, hey, we hung with the number 1 team without minimizing. I mean, in college basketball, guys' jobs are on the line, right? Like, it's a big deal. And not saying that's the end of the world. Right? So what was the process that got us to compete with number 1? And if we can get those process-focused goals where we're working on skills and development and moving kids forward in that way, without harping on the outcomes, that reduces the anxiety and it still lets us develop the kids at the same time. So that's a big thing for the parents. If it's like, oh, you missed that goal. No, let's reinforce that they were in the right spot, right? That we are moving, that we're strengthening, we're improving, we're getting better as a team, right? Without always being like, it's binary. It's win or lose. It's good or bad.
So do you have you said you coach your kids, right? So with your background, do you tend to notice when kids make a mistake? I tend to really pick up the last few years is when they make a mistake, where their eyes go right when they make a mistake, right? And my more anxious players tend to look at their parents really fast, right? And so what kind of advice could you give to those parents as kind of one of those, and I don't want to sit here and talk like I messed up my first 4 kids. Like my 5th one, I'm removed enough, but even then it's like, I got to consciously take that deep breath and be like, just walk away. So it's more of like, what kind of advice can you give me when my kid makes a mistake and they look right at me? Like I need to probably own something going on there, right?
Yeah. I do it too. This is super hard, right? We lost a playoff game by an extra point. And my reaction was, oh, I had the body language that I know I don't want, but it was so close and it bounced off the guy's hands. And so I did the thing that I teach people not to do, where it was totally outcome focused. The guy was in the right spot. The quarterback made a good throw. It just bounced off the guy's hands, right? And so, but I did it. So my point there being lots of empathy. It's super hard. Whether you're a coach or a parent, because you want the outcome. Right?
Well, you knew how close they were, right?
Yeah.
So you're reacting to the practices, running the drill, it being successful. There it was. You're not, well, hopefully, right? We're not disappointed and mad that the kid dropped it. It's more of, it's a reaction that we tend to do in sports, right?
Yeah.
We want to show that we're upset, but it could be taken wrong by our own child, right?
Yeah.
They could look and they see dad not looking at them, rolling their eye, what do they feel? Like, oh, dad's disappointed in Matt, right?
Well, and they're devastated already too, right?
Right.
So the other coach and I that I worked with for that flag football team in particular, we got together, so that was like literally the last play of the game. We could have won it. We didn't win. We got them together and we had a big cheer. We're like, this is going to be the loudest cheer of the season. Our season's over, so we got to be the loudest cheer, and brought them together, and the kids turned around really fast. Like, we were disappointed, they were disappointed, they flipped it. I think, I don't think it's all on us, they're really good kids. And I think that they knew that we weren't, upset at them. We weren't angry. We were just like you said, we were all disappointed, but we weren't mad.
I got a really cool example from this year's soccer season from my 8-year-old. They have not won very many games. They've not scored many goals. After one game, I think it was definitely double digits to 0. And my son jumped in the car. I said, "Hey Scott, what'd you think of the game?" He had a big smile on his face. He had a blast. And I attribute that almost entirely to the reaction of the coach. The coach afterward did not express disappointment or disappointment. They had fun, and it was mostly based on his response. I'm convinced.
Yeah. Well,
So
there's always things we can find, right? Especially in youth coaching, there's always things we can find they did well. Even if it was just, hey, good job showing up to the game, you know what I mean? Like, we got here and we sat and we picked the flowers the whole time, and I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for coming, man. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're the best flower picker I've seen all year.
Yeah, way to be out there. And way to be there with your team, because, when we talk about, an intrinsic motivation, there has to be some degree of autonomy, right? They can't just do it because coach, I want to keep coach happy. They got to do it because they want to do it, right? So there's got to be some degree of autonomy with it. There's got to be some degree of competence. The more competent we get, the more we're going to feel like we have intrinsic motivation for things. So we talk about autonomy, we talk about competence, and then we talk about relatedness. How related do you feel? How much belonging do you feel with this group of people? And that's what brings people back. So that's from a really famous theory called self-determination theory. But if you have autonomy, you have competence, you have relatedness, you bring those things together and you're increasing competence in practice, and you're letting the kids have fun together, and you're hopefully playing with their buddies, right, in some way, and they enjoy being there, and there's cheering and there's rewards, and it's fun, and then they're developing an intrinsic motivation to practice and increase that competence as they go. But if it's always I got to do this because if I don't do this, dad or coach is going to get mad, they're going to lose that intrinsic desire to play, right? And then they're going to stop playing over time because it's not rewarding to them. I just got to do this so that dad or mom or coach isn't mad at me. We want to avoid that.
Can you give some advice for parents who may not have a lot of contextual expertise? Maybe they know nothing about soccer, so they're not sure what questions even to ask about the process.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have some really specific examples of questions or conversation starters they can use with their children after the game?
Yeah.
Sitting around the dinner table after a soccer game. I know nothing about soccer. What am I going to say to my child?
Yeah. No, it's great. I'm actually a classic example of that because me and soccer do not get along well. Right? I just, for whatever reason, my daughter's team needed a soccer coach. I like coaching. They're kids, right? Let's go. So I became the soccer coach. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. So I used the internet. It's 2023. There's no reason not to know something. Right? You can look it up. So we got on the internet. We started doing things, and I quickly realized that these were 6-year-olds, and it did not matter what I knew about soccer, right? They ran in a little pack around, and so I encouraged their running, right? I encouraged that they were getting out there and that they were kicking, right? And they were with their friends, and even something simple as what was coach asking you to do, right? You tell me what you're doing. Let them educate you on the different things. If they're coming back being like, oh, I didn't score any goals, right? What were some of the things? Did you get in some good places? What were some of the other things that you did well? How was being with so-and-so, right? Encourage that relatedness. Encourage the other pieces. And the research shows from those 3 things, the autonomy, competence, and then belonging, relatedness, if you have 2 of the 3, you're likely to maintain intrinsic motivation for the thing. So even the kid who's not very quote-unquote talented at the sport, well, they can still have that intrinsic desire to play and to enjoy it, right?
Yeah, the data are really clear in that kids play sports primarily to be with their friends and to have fun. Those are the reasons kids play sports.
I know that's one of the reasons I did
they're
too.
different, but
Yeah. So if we're losing our mind on the sideline, like coming back to your parent because they missed a goal, or because they dropped that extra point, right? Or, you know, in dance, my daughter does dance. Talk about performance anxiety, right? You are alone on a stage with an audience and a panel of judges. Let's go. Let's do everything we can to drive up that anxiety, right? So what do I talk to her about? I talk about how much, like, try and feed them confidence building food. How much have you practiced this? Oh, I practice it so much, like I can do it in my sleep. Great, let's feed you some more confidence building food. So you put in the time to be good at this. Yeah, I've put in the time. Okay, great. So let's not worry about people out there. Remember what you've done, right? And it's easy to say, don't worry, right? So here's another little tricky thing about our brain. Our brain doesn't hear the word don't. If you're in there saying, don't worry, what are you telling your kid?
Worry.
Worry.
That's all.
Worry. Right? There's something to be worried about. And they're being like, hey, don't play so tight.
Tense up.
Yeah, they're like, oh, I'm tight. Apparently I'm tight. Let's go. So try and phrase things in a way, you know, the classic one in basketball, don't foul, right? How can you rephrase that?
Contain them.
Yeah.
Play good defense.
Move your feet. Get in
Get in
front.
front, yeah.
Right? Guard within the boundaries of the rules. Right? There's all sorts of ways we can phrase things. And I catch myself, like I said, lots of empathy. I'm a coach too. When I get out there, I'm like, don't think. All right, move your feet, right? Like you got to get your chest in front of the player instead of just reaching down. Because your body and your brain don't hear the word don't. So let's emphasize what we want them to do, not what we don't want them to do.
Yeah, no, and to your point of it being kind of their choice, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's rephrase that. It's like, it's a big thing in the coaching world as far as coaches to coaches is ask the players questions. Hey, what can you do there?
Yeah.
You know, what can you do to slow them down defensively? Like, what could you do to make a better shot, right?
Yep.
Like, oh, I got to follow through. Like, they're going through the process, right, to get the outcome versus just focusing on the outcome. Or we just joysticking them, right? Like, go harder. Like, that's the solution to 90% of the things for some parents, right, is just go harder. Like, I'm sure, try harder. I'm sure that'll help. You know? Now you're more out of position, and now you're less, you know what I mean? And so, especially in soccer, I try to tell a lot of parents, like 6-year-olds, right? There's probably a reason why some of those kids don't want to go in the pack. Because 3 kids at any given time are getting their shins kicked, right? And like, why would you want to go in there? Like adults, if you went in there and be like, here's a ball, and 3 of you just get whacked in the shin, like how long are you going to keep doing that? You know, and so when I hear up to 30% of people, kids nowadays, right, will get a performance disorder, right, that takes away from part of their life and their quality of life, right? So I look at sports, though, as just a great opportunity if we can rephrase how we look at it, that it's actually a training ground to reduce that, if we do it properly, right? As adults, let's take responsibility for, you know, the way we coach, the way we talk, the way we focus on of effort versus outcomes, right? And then reactions on the sideline. Because I was thinking back to your example of the kid dropping that could have won the touchdown. So he hears, oh, from the sideline, elation from the other sideline, but he just disappointed the entire sideline. And that might be hard, right? I mean, I think there's a lot of, especially at the collegiate level, right? When you disappoint the whole crowd, and then heaven forbid you go on social media and realize the tens of thousands of people that now want to voice, you know, their disdain for your existence. So going back to sports can be a great anxiety reducing if done properly, but we can also induce anxiety very quickly when done wrong. So let's be much more conscious of the way we as adults, you know, treat children, you know, playing a game.
Well, and to your point, like, we didn't even discuss this, but you set it up perfectly. There's a brand new meta-analysis. So a meta-analysis is a study of studies, right? Like where they take all the different research and they put it together and they essentially look, what's the size of this effect? Playing sports reduced anxiety on general more so than kids that didn't play sports. So we talk about these things, like there's possibilities for things going sideways. And there's possibilities for kids learning life skills. So as adults, people that played youth sports tend to have less anxiety. People who played youth sports tend to have more coping skills. Because, to the point of the avoidance, right? They've been in those situations where they've been exposed and learned to habituate and learn to control their emotions to some degree. So it's a great training ground for life and reducing anxiety. And the current research shows that in general, kids that stick with sports, it does that, right? So we just got to continue with what you're talking about and just learn these skills and give ourselves some grace. We're going to lose our minds sometimes on things. I do it. Everyone does it. We lose our minds in areas where we're like, oh, I could have done that better. So have some grace and then just keep working to be better.
But those are great teaching tools as well, right? Like when we mess up as a parent on the sideline, and we put away our own ego for a little while and we go apologize to our 7-year-old.
Yep.
Like, hey, the way Dad was reacting was completely not necessary and should not have happened. I'm going to try to be better.
Yeah.
I know I've had to do that with my kids.
Yeah,
And so, I think that's a great stoppage to today's discussion. Hopefully we can discuss some more, right? Because I think sports, we think sports are great. That's why we're here, right? Trying to use sports to do all the positives that is. A lot of us have different reasons, right? Like, I did sports because my parents got separated, and that got me on the kind of straight and narrow, right, through those tough teenager years. And so there's all sorts of good reasons to be involved in sports and have good parents around. And so thank you for your time today. Appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thanks for all you do.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.